Welcome everyone to Biology 2 class today. And in this class, we will discuss a few topics related to microorganisms. We will discuss that what are microorganisms, what they do, what are their properties, what effects they have on our lives, how they live, where do they live, right? So, and how many different types of microorganisms do we have? So, this is going to be the theme of our today's lecture. And let us start from the general introduction of microorganisms. So as the name indicates, as you can see here, it says micro and organism. Micro means something which is very small and that you cannot see with your naked eye, right? So micro is something which is very small that you cannot see. So if you cannot see a microorganism, how do you see it or how it was discovered? So that is the question. So the basically the discovery of microorganisms is related to the discovery or the invention of microscope. So when microscope was created, so microorganisms were discovered, right? So let us discuss about microorganisms in detail. So as I just explained that a microorganism is a microbe, it is also called a microbe, right? And an organism of microscopic size. What do we mean by microscopic size? By microscopic size, we mean which is very small and you can only see it with the help of a microscope. So as you can see here on the right-hand side, we have a microscope. It is an instrument that enables us to see very small things that we cannot see with our naked eyes, right? So, and how can we see such small things with the help of the microscope? It magnifies it, right? It has lenses in it, sometimes one, sometimes more than one, and they are arranged in specific order. And when you place something here, so the light passes through it, and it gets light up, and when it is magnified, you can see 10,000 times greater or zoomed in a picture of something that you are trying to see here. So microorganisms, they are very small. You cannot see them with your own eyes. You only need microscope. And these are single-celled. Most of the microorganisms that you cannot see, they are made up of one cell, right? As you guys know that a living body and all the living organisms, they are made up of cells, and we are mostly like we call them multicellular cells, right? You and I, we are made up of multicellular cells. So we are multicellular organisms. We are made up of more than one cell. But these microorganisms, most of them, they are made up of only one cell. So sometimes these one cells, they can form, they can join together and they can form a colony of cells. I hope you guys understand the word colony. When people live together in a colony, they have many houses in the colony, right? So that is called a colony. So microorganisms, they also live by making colonies. Okay, so we have another slide here. So microorganisms, these are basically their observation started from the invention of a microscope. So when microscope was discovered, so eventually microorganisms were also discovered with it. So in 1670s, by a scientist, Leeuwenhoek was the one who first observed these tiny little organisms, living organisms in water. And he said that, okay, there is another form of living life that was previously unknown. And then in 1850s, after a long time, as you can see here, more than 100 years, hundreds of years. So Louis Pasteur was another scientist, found that microorganisms caused food spoilage. So previously it was unknown. You know, if you leave the bread on a kitchen shelf and you come back the next morning, so you will see these green dots on it, and it will not be edible anymore, right? So scientists, they did not know that what causes the spoilage of food, the spoilage of bread, and the spoilage of other things. So it was Louis Pasteur in 1850s who discovered that these are microorganisms, these little tiny living organisms that we cannot see under normal conditions. These are responsible for this spoilage of food. So after that, in 1880s, 20 to 30 years after the experiments of Louis Pasteur, Robert Koch was another scientist who discovered that microorganisms caused the diseases. Before 1880s, when people used to get sick, at that time, or people did not have any understanding that why a person is getting sick. A person would be coughing and person would be having a fever. But at that times, the doctors or the other people or the scientists, they did not know before 1880s that why people get sick. So this was 1880s was a fundamental year in improving the human health and in understanding the human health. So once we figured out that what makes us sick, so from there, different drugs started to synthesize, and antibiotics and other drugs that we have today. We are very lucky that in our generation we know so much about microorganisms and human health that if we get sick, we have treatment, right? We have antibiotics, we have other drugs, other painkillers that we can use, and we get better in 4 or 5 days. So, but back in 1800s, that was not the case. So at that time, Robert Koch discovered that tuberculosis. May I ask, do you guys know what tuberculosis is? Anyone? Ariana, Camille, Natalie, Rodrigo, do you guys know what tuberculosis is? Anyone? I would encourage you to participate in the class, but for now, let me explain. But if you do not understand anything, you can unmute your mic and you can ask me the question. All right. So tuberculosis is a disease which of the lungs, right, of the respiratory system. People cough a lot. People can spit blood, and basically it is a micro infection that affects your lungs. You will have a slight fever, especially at night. You will feel weak. You will not be able to work. You will feel sweaty all the time, right? You will be sweaty most of the times. And it is a dangerous disease. It used to be dangerous, but now since we know that what causes it, it is treatable, but it takes some time. Nowadays, the treatment is around between 4 to 5 months. So diphtheria is another infection caused by microorganisms, and so is the anthrax. Okay, so we have 3 main life forms that were arised from a last universal common ancestor. You guys must have read before that all the life in the universe, it started from a single cell organism. So this LUCA, L-U-C-A, this is called last universal common ancestor. Okay, so all the life, it started from this, and the life is divided into bacteria, archaea, and eukaryota. So we have 3 divisions of life, This is a multicellular life. Most of the organisms in the eukaryota are multicellular, which means more than one cells. Archaea, we have all the organisms, living organisms in the archaea, they are single-celled organisms. And same is the case with bacteria. In bacteria, we have prokaryotes, the initial cells, and these are all also unicellular organisms. So this is the division of life, and we will be studying, we are studying this in detail today. Okay, so let's move forward to our another slide. So now microorganisms, you guys know that what are they, and now we will see that where they are found. So microorganisms can have a very different habitats. Do you guys know what a habitat is? Anyone would like to answer the question? What is a habitat? Yes? All right, let me explain. Habitat is something where people live or something lives, right? For example, what is my habitat? I live in a house, I live in a city, so this is my habitat, right? So if something is living in the soil, so the soil will be the habitat of that living organism. For example, something is living inside water. So water is the main habitat for that living organism. So any place where a living organism lives or spends most of his time, that is called a habitat, right? So then we have equator. So poles, we have North Pole, we have South Pole, and then we have equator in the middle. So what we are trying to say here that these microorganisms, they are almost everywhere on Earth. It is said that there is not a single place on this planet which does not contain microorganisms. All the surfaces, even my skin at the moment, your skin at the moment, your hands, your laptop, your table, your clothes, all of these surfaces, these are covered with microorganisms, right? So they are extremely huge in numbers, and they are, in fact, they are more than they are humans and all the other life combined on the planet. So they can be found in the deserts, in geysers, which are hot springs, rocks, in mountains and rocks, and in the deep sea. So microorganisms, they are also found in the deep sea. And that is why we say that microorganisms, they are everywhere on this planet. So as you can see on the right-hand side, we have some pictures of microorganisms. Some are magnified with the help of electron microscope or a simple microscope. We cannot see, usually we cannot see these under normal conditions. So we have eukaryota, includes all the multicellular organisms as well as many unicellular protists and protozoans that are microbes. Then after that, we have some protists are related to animals and some to green plants. So protists are living organisms, they are microscopic, and some of them, they are similar to animals, and some of them, they are similar to plants. So let us talk about the living conditions of the microorganisms. So microorganisms, some of them, they are adapted to extreme environments, such as very hot. You may think that something cannot live in a volcano, but you are wrong. There are bacteria, there are microorganisms that can even live inside volcanoes, inside hot volcanoes, right? So that is why we are saying that they are adapted to extreme temperatures, very hot, very cold conditions. What would be the very cold condition? And glacial lakes, inside the glaciers where the temperatures are very low, inside the earth, or deep in the ocean where temperatures are very cold, you will find microorganisms there as well. At high pressure, at the base of the mountain, so you will find microorganisms. And there is one example of a microorganism, and it is a Dinococcus radioduranus. So this is a name of a bacterium which can sustain high radiation. For example, it can survive most of the radiations of the nuclear bomb, right? So these are some of the extreme living conditions where microorganisms can be found, and they are adapted to live in such extreme conditions. So these are the pictures. You see permafrost, sea ice, and polar regions, cold sleeps and mud volcanoes, shallow water, hydrothermal vents. And then we have hot springs, right? Volcanoes, deserts, acid mine, where the pH is very low, right? So all of these areas, they are covered with microorganisms, and that is why we say that they are everywhere on the planet. So what is the importance of microorganisms? If we talk about the importance of microorganisms, so we use microorganisms to make different types of foods, right? Sourdough pizza or any sourdough bread, so or even bread, right? So yeast is used to make bread. Yeast is a microorganism. We used to make yogurt, right, with the process of fermentation. So yogurt is made by microorganisms. What else? Wine, beer, right? So all these drinks, they are prepared by microorganisms by the process of fermentation. So they help us in cleaning wastewater. You must have seen water filtration plants or the water treatment plants in America or wherever you guys are from. So we have, what happens that the sewage water is brought into tanks, and their microbes, they break down the impurities or the toxic compounds in that water, and they literally eat those toxic wastes and compounds, and they turn that dirty water, they can change that dirty water into clean drinking water by eating all the dirt and all the toxic chemicals from that water, right? So they are used to produce fuel, enzymes, and other bioactive compounds such as drugs, microorganisms, some bacteria. They release antibiotics that we use to treat infections, right? So they are they are harmful as well, and they are beneficial as well. So other microbes. So microbes are essential tools in biology as model organisms, and they are used in biological warfare, right? So you must have heard about the biological weapons or the chemical weapons. So hundreds of years ago, or a few hundred years ago, in the 1880s, so there used to be biological attacks. Armies, they used to go with microbes, and they used to spread or infect the rivers, wells, and the areas with microbes, and all the people in that area would die because of the infections, because in those times they were not aware, and there were no treatments of these microorganisms. You must have heard about plague. Plague used to kill. Plague have killed thousands and thousands of people in Europe and in China, right? And in India and Pakistan as well. So plague is also a serious disease. It is caused by a microorganism. So that is why they are very dangerous. They can be misused. And now let's come to the benefits of microorganisms. I don't want to scare you anymore. So human microbiota, including the essential gut flora. So inside our bodies, we have friendly microorganisms, and these microorganisms, they help us in digestion. For when we eat food, that food is broken down into smaller components, into simpler substances, with the help of these microorganisms. So now, this was a general introduction. Now we are entering our second topic, which is the prokaryotes and the domains of bacteria and archaea. So we will be talking about bacteria, its structure, and archaea. So what are the prokaryotes? So prokaryotes are cellular microorganisms. They are unicellular. They are made up of one cell, and that cell is it does not contain any nucleus, right? So and what are the examples? We have bacteria. Bacteria is a classic example of the prokaryotic cell. So they lack the internal membranes in prokaryotes. Distinguishes the lack of internal membranes in prokaryotes distinguishes them from the eukaryotes, right? So this is a simple structure of a prokaryotic cell, and this is a typical bacteria, which is a rod-shaped bacteria. As you can see, it is like a capsule. So it does not contain any nucleus. You can see that the DNA is just present in the cytoplasm. So there is a cell wall, there is a cell membrane, but inside the cell membrane, there is nothing except the DNA and ribosomes, right? So, and this is called a flagellum. With the help of this tail, it moves around in water or wherever its habitat is. So this is a simple structure of a prokaryotic cell, and prokaryotes are, and bacteria are basically prokaryotes. So there are few micrometers in length, and bacteria were among the first life forms to appear on Earth and are present in most of its habitats. So our Earth is occupied by bacteria. So bacteria basically rule the planet. We may think that we are the rulers of the planet, but no, we are not. Just like a few years ago, 2 years back, coronavirus, the pandemic began, and we were confined to our homes, lockdowns and masks, and many people died because of that. So a single small, tiny microorganism that we cannot even see can cause so much damage that it can disrupt all the life on the planet, right? So bacteria inhibit soil, water, acidic hot springs, radioactive waste, and deep biosphere of the Earth's crust. So bacteria play a vital role in many stages of the nutrient cycle by recycling the nutrients and the fixation of nitrogen from the atmosphere. So what do we mean by the nutrient cycle? For example, you eat bread, right? And that bread is broken down into simpler substances. And when living organisms, they die, right? So these living organisms, even no matter plants or animals, both of them, they are acted upon by these bacteria, and the bodies are broken down, and the tissues are dissolved, and tissues are broken down, and then the atoms and the nutrients and the minerals that we are made up of, they are made available again into the soil, and from the soil, they can again become a part of a plant or any other animal, right? So this is what we mean by the nutrient cycle. So it is a cycle which goes on and on. So the nutrient cycle includes the decomposition of dead bodies, as I just said, of plants and animals. Bacteria are responsible for the putrefaction stages in this process. So what do we mean by putrefaction? That they are being broken down into simpler substances, into simple molecules by these bacteria. So bacteria also live in a symbiotic and a parasitic relationship with plants and animals. So what do we mean by symbiotic and parasitic relationships is that a symbiotic relationship is a 50% gain and a 50% loss. So bacteria, they take something from its host and they give something beneficial to it. And both the host and bacteria, they cannot survive without each other. So this is a symbiotic relationship. And if we talk about parasitic relationship are always pathological. They can cause diseases and they are dangerous. Because what happens is that bacteria only takes the nutrients from you and it will not give you anything back. So when you are not getting anything back in return, it means that it's a loss. It's a loss to your body. And this relationship is called a parasitic relationship. So the study of bacteria, a person who studies about bacteria, he is called or she is called a bacteriologist, and the subject is called bacteriology. Logy means to study, and bacteria means bacteria. So, and it is a branch of microbiology. So humans and most other animals carry vast numbers, approximately 10 to the times 13 and 10 to the times 14 of bacteria. So we have lots and lots of bacteria in our bodies, as much as we have the number of cells. So most of these bacteria, they are found in our gut, in our intestines, and there are many on the skin. Most of the bacteria in and on the body are harmless or rendered so by the protective effects of the immune system, and many are beneficial. So the most common diseases that these microorganisms or these prokaryotic bacteria, they cause are respiratory infections. They affect lungs and they affect our breathing, like coronavirus. That is a virus we are studying about bacteria. So there is a disease called pharyngitis, bronchitis, pneumonia. So these diseases, these are caused by prokaryotic bacteria or bacteria. All bacteria are prokaryotes. So antibiotics are used to treat bacterial infections and are also used in farming. Making antibiotic resistance is a growing problem. So when you use antibiotic repeatedly, it can get resistant to that bacteria. So bacteria shields itself from that antibiotic, and that antibiotic no longer acts upon that bacteria. And we don't get healed, or we don't get treated. That is why there are increasing number of infections that the antibiotics can no longer treat, and it gets very difficult to treat a person which is being affected with an antibiotic-resistant bacteria, because we do not have the drugs to kill those bacteria. So this is a huge problem in the third world countries and in the developed countries like America and Europe and China. And so now the bacteria can be found in different shapes. They can be round, right? They can be coccus, cocci, streptococci. They can shape, they can join together and form a rope-like structure. They can be rod shaped, right? They have a stalk, and they have a budding or appendaged bacteria or a hypha, right? So this is an enlarged rod this is a vibro, this is a comma form, club rod, this is a helical form of a bacteria, right? So this one is a filamentous. So bacteria can take different bacteria, and they have many different shapes. So now let us talk about archaea. So archaea is also a type of a prokaryotic cell, and it is a living organism. So these single-celled organisms, these are microorganisms that lack nuclei. They also do not have nucleus, and therefore they are prokaryotes, right? So archaeal cells have unique properties, separating them from the two domains, bacteria and eukaryota. So archaea are basically prokaryotes, but they are somewhat different than bacteria, and of course, eukaryota. So archaea possess genes and several metabolic pathways that are more closely related to eukaryotes, notably for the enzymes involved in transcription and translation. Transcription is a process where genes are formed, or messenger RNAs are created from the genes in the DNA, and translation is the process when those messenger RNAs are translated into proteins. So this transcription is the formation of messenger RNA from genes, and translation is the formation of proteins from that messenger RNA. So archaea use more diverse energy sources. They can feed on lots of things on which bacteria or eukaryotes cannot, ranging from organic compounds such as sugars and to ammonia, to metal ions, or even hydrogen gas. So imagine a living organism eating up a hydrogen gas, right? So, and their appetite is very diverse, and they can eat literally anything. So the first observed archaea were extremophiles. Extremophiles are the microorganisms that we discussed in the previous slides today, that they are found in hot springs and salt lakes where no other living organism can exist. So they are the major part of the Earth's life. They are a part of the microbiota. So the archaea are just like bacteria. They also live inside our bodies, and we are friends with them. They are not pathogenic. They cannot cause diseases. So they are a part of a microbiota. So microbiota is the name of those, is a collective name for those microorganisms, for those bacteria that are harmless to human beings. And these living organisms, they live within us. They live in our mouth, they live in our stomach, they live in our gut, right? So they are called the microbiota. So in the human microbiome, they are important in the gut, mouth, and on the skin. So here are some of the pictures of these archaea, which are single-celled prokaryotes, but that are different from bacteria. So they are also important. They protect us from different diseases, and they fight germs on our skin. They fight germs in our gut, right? So, and they are geographically diverse. They have a geographical diversity. They play a role in carbon fixation, nitrogen cycling, organic compound turnover. So now we are entering the third part of our lecture, which is the eukaryotes, fungi, and algae, and protozoa, and helminths. So now we are moving from a small cell or an old cellular form to a more advanced cellular type, right? So here is the structure of a cell, which is a eukaryotic cell. And this is more advanced form of a cell. And we are made up of these types of cells. So bacteria, they were made up of the old type of cells, or we can say that the type of cell which is not very efficient, and it cannot carry out many functions. But this cell is the foundation of all the unicellular and multicellular life on the planet. We humans, animals, plants, we all are made up of multicellular cells. So as you can see here that these cells, they contain a nucleus, and we have lots and lots of cell organelles in it, such as ribosome, where proteins are made. We have Golgi bodies. They are responsible for the protein modification and transportation. Plasma membrane, which protects the cell from the outermost, the outside environment. Cytoplasm is a liquid in which all these organelles are present. We have lysosomes, we have centrosomes, we have vacuoles, we have rough endoplasmic reticulum, we have smooth endoplasmic reticulum, we have nucleolus, we have nucleus, we have centriole, right? So you guys have studied about the function of these individual cell organelles in the biology 1, but now we are dealing with advanced course here. So with respect to the unicellular microorganisms in the eukaryotes, we will be dealing with fungi, algae, protozoa, and helminths. So yeasts are eukaryotes, which are made up of this advanced type of the cell. These are single-celled microorganisms. They are made up of one cell, and you cannot see them without the help of a microscope. So these are classified as the members of the fungus kingdom. And the first yeast originated hundreds of millions of years ago, and at least 1,500 species are currently recognized. So yeasts are very old, and they are very diverse in its type. So yeasts are unicellular organisms that evolved from multicellular ancestors. So this point is really interesting. Normally we see that, or we read that most of the life, it originated from a single cell. But in the case of yeast, it is reversed. We say that yeasts were created by a multicellular cellular form. So this is very interesting, and this is a fact that you would like to remember. So you can note it down. So with some species having the ability to develop multicellular characteristics by forming strings. So this single cell, as you can see here under a microscope, and look here, it can change itself into a multicellular form. As you can see here, the one cell is being changed into another cell by this bud. So this is called budding, right? So this is something interesting about these fungi. So now what are protozoa? So protozoa are a polyphyletic a group of microorganisms, which is also single-celled. They are made up of eukaryotic cell. They are free-living, or they can be parasitic. For example, amoeba. You must have heard of the name amoeba paramecium before. So they feed on organic matter such as organic debris, right? So these are a type of microorganism which belongs to the eukaryotes, and they are different than fungi. So these are some of the examples and pictures of the protozoa. The reproduction in protozoa can be sexual, or it can be asexual. So budding is a type of asexual reproduction, where one cell divides into two different cells. And in the case of sexual reproduction, two protozoa, they come together, they join together, and they exchange nuclear material with the help of a conjugation tube, right? So just like other sexual reproductions, they take place. So now we are talking about the helminths. So helminths can be also microscopic. You may not be able to see them with a naked eye. You will need a magnifying glass to properly examine these, right? So they are parasites. They can cause various diseases. And recently in Australia, last week, I was reading in the news that a woman was found with a worm in her brain. So she was complaining of headaches and she was complaining of memory loss. So the doctors, they finally decided to do an MRI scan. And when they checked, when they scanned the brain, so they found a little patch of liquid in her brain. And when she was taken to the ER, and when the surgery was performed, so the doctors were surprised to see this worm inside her brain, right? So you should be very careful with the food. You should always wash your hands before consuming the food, right? So you may have eggs. They lay eggs, so you may have eggs on your food. You may have eggs on your hands, which you cannot see. They are very tiny. And when you will consume the food with your dirty hands, so you may get this infection of these worms. So the egg is ingested, and it is transported into the bloodstream. It reaches your gut. It can reach your lungs. It can reach and from there it is swallowed, right? And when it is swallowed, it reaches intestine, and where it is replicated, it multiplies, and they make copies of themselves. And then the eggs are laid in your gut, and the eggs are excreted out in the feces. And the feces, when they are taken from the farm, from the soil, so those feces from eggs, those eggs, right? They can be on the vegetables that you bring from the supermarket. And when you eat those vegetables raw, without washing those vegetables, they may have these eggs. So you should be very careful. So now we are entering another portion of our lecture, which is about viruses. So since the coronavirus pandemic, we have lots of, controversies, and particularly in the United States, so some say that, there is no such thing as coronavirus, and this is just like flu, but that is not the case. All over the world, scientists, they are performing experiments on it. I myself, in my lab, I am experimenting with the coronavirus, and I'm studying different types of coronaviruses in the lab. So it is real, and it can cause disease. And I have seen cells getting damaged by these coronaviruses. So do not believe in conspiracy theories. Become a scientist and experiment yourself, and check the facts yourself, right? So whenever something happens, a lot of propaganda is initiated on that, and people benefit from it. And most of the people, they lose their lives because of that propaganda, right? So do not believe in something which is not scientifically proven. So here are some of the viruses. This is a bacteriophage virus. You can see its shape. There is another type of virus, which is a tobacco mosaic virus. It affects a tobacco plant. We have adenoviruses. We have influenza virus, where you get a flu So it is also caused by a virus. So viruses are basically living, partly living and partly dead organisms, right? So they cannot live without a living cell. Outside the body, they are found in a crystallized form, and they can remain submissive and inactive for even hundreds and thousands of years. And some of them, they can die after 4 or 5 years or 4 or 5 days, right? So there is a huge variety. But in order to replicate, they need a living cell. They cannot uh, uh, sustain on organic matter. They cannot eat sugars. They cannot survive on food. So they only attack living, healthy cells, plant and human cells alike. So now look at the structure of the virus. Here is the structure of a bacteriophage. We have a head, we have a neck, we have a tail, and we have a base. So the head consists of the DNA, which is a nuclear material. The virus uses this material to attack and to hack a healthy living cell. And this entire virus, it lands on a bacteria. Viruses are very smaller than bacteria. That is why they can easily land on a bacteria. And this DNA, it is injected with the help of this tube here, right, into the bacterial cell. When the viral DNA, when the DNA of the virus or the nuclear material of the virus, it enters the cell, it reaches nucleus, and it gets mixed with the DNA of a bacterial cell, and it hacks that all the functions of the bacterial DNA. And now this is in charge of that cell. It will order that DNA to work for himself, and it will make copies of itself. So many copies will be produced, and the cell, it will eventually burst. It will be lysed, and new viruses and more viruses would emerge. So this is the structure of the influenza virus. Okay, so this is the life cycle of a virus. So this is the influenza virus. It lands on your healthy cell. It can enter our bodies via food, via breathing, if we eat something, right? So it reaches our cells, epithelial cells, which are the cells in our mouth and in our pharynx, in our respiratory tract. So the first step is attachment. The second step is penetration. So this virus, it enters the cell. So when it enters the cell, the third step is uncoating. It releases its DNA into that cell, into a living cell, and then biosynthesis occurs in the fourth step. This nuclear material, it enters the nucleus, and then this nucleus is hacked by the viral DNA, and the viral DNA starts making its own copies, and different viruses multiplicated, viruses multiplied in that healthy living cell. And when the number of the virus is increased, so the cell gets damaged, and the new copies of viruses, they are released outside that cell, right? So this is the life cycle of virus. So do you guys have any questions so far? Ariana, Camille, or Natalie? Rodrigo? Any questions? Okay, Camille, Mina, you do not have any questions. Okay, so I hope everyone is getting it, right? So this is this was the life cycle of the virus. This is how life cycle works. So now we are in what are viroids, right? So viroids are small circular single-stranded molecules of infection of infectious RNA. You know, we have DNA in our bodies, we have RNA, we have ribonucleic acid that cause several plant diseases. So RNA is a single-stranded DNA molecule, like, and we call that an RNA. We do not call it DNA, right? So these are basically viroids. So small fragments of RNA, they are not viruses, they are not bacteria, they are not prokaryotes, they are not eukaryotes. So these small pieces of RNA, they can cause several plant diseases and they can cause several human diseases because they can be translated into proteins. And once we get a faulty protein in our body, it will damage the normal cellular function, right? So now we have another term, and that is prions. So what are prions? Prions are infectious protein molecules or protein particles that are responsible for a group of transmissible or inherited neurodegenerative diseases as a result of a prion protein misfolding. So what happens is that, for example, sometimes when we eat food or when we consume proteins, so what happens is that there is a molecule of a protein which is not folded properly, which is not developed, which is not synthesized properly. So that may enter in our bodies. So for example, so this is very rare, you know, it can happen if we are eating meat, if we are eating beef, chicken, fish, right, or any plant or animal protein. So one of the protein molecule that we will be ingesting, and of those protein molecules will be dangerous. And when that dangerous protein, it enters our bodies, it can cause inherited diseases, transmissible diseases. What do we mean by inherited diseases? By inherited diseases, we mean that they can be passed on, right? So God forbid, like, for example, if someone gets these infections, so these can be passed on in our DNA, right? And what are neurodegenerative? Neurodegenerative diseases are such diseases that attack our nervous system. They damage our neurons, they damage our nerves, they damage our central nervous system, and the patient eventually dies. So these are very dangerous. They are 1 in 10 million, or they are one cases are 1 in 50 million. They are very rare, but they exist, right? So these are also microorganisms, or we can say that microscopic substances, which can cause disorder and diseases in our bodies, right? So this is an example of a misfolded protein. So now let us summarize this and see that what we have studied. We started from microorganisms. We discussed different types of microorganisms, where they live. You know, they are extremophiles. Then we talked about prokaryotes, the cells or the microorganisms that do not have a nucleus. So they consist of bacteria and archaea. And then we discussed eukaryotes in detail, fungi, algae, protozoa, and helminths. And then we finally came to viruses, viroids, and prions. So this was today's lecture. Thank you so much for listening patiently and participating in the class. And if you guys do not have any question, so that was all from my side for today. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much for participating, and have a nice day ahead. You can leave the class. We will see you in our next lecture. Thank you.